So whānau, yesterday, today, tomorrow, comes out of the particular legislative space in our Act, which gives us the right to explore Māori worldviews. Section 11 we have tattooed on our hearts. Section 7 just below that. Because in those spaces, particularly Section 11, which acknowledges the needs, values and beliefs of Māori as tangata whenua, we have located our kaupapa Māori research space. We have been able, in this report, to offer descriptions of frameworks and possibilities that we hope New Zealand will take warmly to. We acknowledge that they are not prescriptions. They are descriptions. Many of our people have not had the joy of being born into knowledge of their whakapapa, and we've heard some of the stories from people like the descendants of Parihaka today that give an insight into why that may be. So we have not wanted to add to the burden of pain of those who are not connected at this time to their whakapapa, to their whānau, but we've tried to create a resource that gives them an opportunity to find support in the journey towards those connections. We believe absolutely that it is a treaty right for every Māori person to be critically literate in knowledge of who they are and where they come from and what possibilities that might generate. So we've, in this work, we hope, created descriptions of some frameworks, some stories, some pathways that enable not only people to connect more closely to who they are, but to feel good about doing that. Section 7 is another part of our legislation that we hold dear because it is about the Families Commission working in a space of resilience and strengths-based. So in the needs, values and beliefs of Māori as tangata whenua, we have taken a very strong position standing this report within the Māori worldview. We have, in part of our concluding analysis, developed the notion of the Māori cultural infrastructure, which we will be doing more work on as one of the reasons why we can understand the story of the Māori Renaissance in this country. Whilst the machinery of government has not always invested in Māori knowledge, in Māori philosophy and in Māori epistemology, there is in the private domains of Māori society what we are calling an infrastructure. People may feel more comfortable using the notion of infrastructure when they're thinking of power or telecommunications or roading, but we've argued that there is a cultural platform sophisticated enough for us to be able to understand how a Māori Renaissance could happen in Aotearoa when it hasn't happened in other parts of the world. We look to Māori cultural knowledge, method and practice to explore the space that we understand resilience and strength from. And yes, they are academic concepts and we make no apology for that. Māori cultural knowledge, others may call Māori epistemology. Māori cultural practice, others may call Māori ontology. Māori methods are very much about us developing our own Indigenous methodologies. The fabulous spot that we can't see but that is there where those bodies of knowledge come together is the spot that the kohanga babies of Aotearoa are being educated in. That's why Hinurewa Pauti was at Massey University aged 16 doing her first degree, and why at age 22 this wonderful young woman on the cover submitted her master's thesis in Te Reo Rangatira, quite possibly the youngest woman in New Zealand ever to have done so. What's in our report? We argued to our board that we needed a document and a resource that was created from the inside of the Māori world looking out, rather than the outside looking in. It was based primarily in Māori worldview, so that Māori knowledge was given a chance to be central and centred and normal in the report. That it took the historical period of the Māori Renaissance. We were clear the Waitangi Tribunal process is enabling whānau hapu and iwi to look at that historical context. We took a more contemporary view and we looked at narratives of whānau success. We want those stories of success to be told. It was the joy of my career to have the research team that I was able to work with, and many of them are here in the room. And as I call the names, I would love them to be able to stand, to grab a chair and to come up on the stage with us. Lisa Davies, Whetu Werata, Huhana Portai Rocks, Colleen Teuta, Sandra Portaka, Punoho McCausland and Dave Bassett. The A research team, if ever I had the chance to work on it, please come up. So what will you find in the table of contents? And I'm going to quickly go through what you will have a chance to read at a later date. The introduction, which we've taken some international literature to position these stories in a particular way. I wanted people to know that to tell a story from the inside out was not an exercise of navel-gazing that no one else would understand. So I've deliberately used Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, Alvin Toffler's Cognitariat from his work Knowledge, Violence and Power at the Edge of the 21st Century, and the notion of Māori entrepreneurship from the Global Entrepreneurial Monitor reports to frame how we even begin the introduction to this work. So Māori are described as outliers, as entrepreneurs and as the cognitariat, and I'd suggest to you that those are not the adjectives that we are usually described with as a people. Chapter 2, our demographic and statistical profile on whānau, has been prepared by Lisa Davies, one of the first, if not the first, Māori woman demographer trained by Professor Ian Poole out of the University of Waikato, and Whetu Wereta, who until recently was the manager of the Māori Statistical Unit at Stats New Zealand. That was a significant enough chapter when we first commissioned it. Given that there is now not a census this year, it is even more significant because people will be able to go to that chapter in the absence of some of the other statistical information that they thought may have been available. In Explorations of Whānau, I've looked into some of the concepts that we want to identify as primary in terms of our work coming out of a Māori worldview as they can be associated with whānau, and really been looking at the notion that when we talk about relationships between people, we are happy to talk about the whakapapa of people and how they relate to each other. And this chapter is really proposing the notion that when we look at the way in which ideas relate to each other, we also need to be as robust in tracking the whakapapa of the ideas we are working with and the epistemological or philosophical bodies of knowledge that they come from. When we don't do that, we get in a confusing muddle about, is whānau the same as family? And if it isn't, what's the basis of the difference? So we've tried to set some frameworks out in that chapter that gives some clarity around some of that thinking. In Chapter 4, there's a brief discussion of the research, design, methods and issues, because often those design aspects are left implicit in a report and you're not really quite sure why people have done the things they've done. For the sake of clarity, we've set that out. In Chapter 5, Colleen got the honour, and I really didn't want to give her this job. I wanted to do it myself, but you know, we have to be able to delegate. Colleen got to interview 11 of our leading women who have worked in the Māori Renaissance. The late Dame Katarina Mataida, Dr Rose Pere, Dame Eritana Tawhiwhirangi, Dr Kyla Russell, Paparangi Reid, Moy Milne, Ngaropi Cameron, Areta Kopu, Barbara Greer, Miriana Pittman, women who have given decades of their lives to Māori development and told wonderful stories about the work they do, how they do it, why they do it, and some of the drivers of it. In Chapter 6, whānau as custodians of culture, we wanted to explore the notion that if the machinery of government has not been the major source of the transmission of te reo Māori me ona tikanga, where has that been happening? And the answer to that is in our whānau context. And so Huhana did a fabulous series of interviews with the Winitana whānau, who through the Ahorangi Genesis play, for example, toured New Zealand, taking traditional knowledge and culture about our people and turning it into a stunning play and roadshow. But she, in that chapter, gave us a very intimate view of the birth of a hapu, and we are honoured that the whānau was prepared to tell their story to her. And it's a testimony to the quality of her standing as a researcher and her work that they were prepared to do that. In Chapter 7, Maranga Waitaha is a fabulous story of an iwi's determination to create a new future for their people. From a context of a colonised resource base, how moving into the third millennium, this smaller iwi, we know the stories of the larger iwi, Ngai Tahu, Tainui, Ngāti Porou, we don't always hear the stories of smaller iwi. And this has been a fabulously powerful story of a smaller iwi facing the future with the resources they have, very honestly and courageously carving out a new pathway forward. In Chapter 8, Dave Bassett, our only non-Māori researcher, but married to one of Katarina Mataida's daughters and the father of Māori children, and an expert in economic development. And we needed the Business Roundtable to be confident of the level of analysis that was going into this chapter, and Dave was identified as the best person to do it. He's done a case study around brand Māori, the notion of brand Māori, and then as a way of exploring the way in which brand Māori can be developed at a global level, done case studies of 4 businesses using brand Māori to get a global advantage, and they are Kia Kaha, Kaitaia Whaia, Boy, the film, before it won all of its awards. Dave had a wonderful interview with Ainsley Gardner, and the 4th one was the Raukuri Caves. So out of the case studies of those stunning businesses, Dave was able to make the case for brand Māori in an economic sense, and to explore the role and status of Māori language and culture in economic transformation. We're more aware of the case for social transformation and cultural transformation than we are of the case for economic transformation. It provides a fabulous addition to the report. We argued in the proposal to the board that we needed to explore whānau futures in an integrated frame, cultural, social, economic and environmental analyses coming together in one. In the conclusion, the exploration that we wanted to focus on in terms of the Māori cultural infrastructure, and yes, those are my children, and that's me next to the boat, and we caught all those fish. And if you want to have a really good fishing experience, Joe McClutchy is his name. He's on the East Coast and he's the most fabulous fishing tour guide you want to have. So we identified 6 key parts to what we've called the Māori cultural infrastructure. The people ourselves, at no point in our history have we given up on who we are and who we want to be. And that's a positive, powerful celebration of the human spirit that is very much a part of Māori development. The Māori worldview itself and the body of knowledge which we have attempted to argue in the report is philosophically oppositional to the knowledge base of the treaty partner. So when we look at our treaty-based approaches to some of the educational research that we're doing, one of the areas that we are suggesting needs to be explored more fully in the future is the philosophical contradictions between the knowledge origins of one treaty party and the knowledge origins of the other. We identified that the 1,300 marae in New Zealand are over 25% increase in the time between the 1998 TPK survey of marae and those statistics which we got off TPK this year, is a very powerful infrastructural network that sits around the country, very much utilised by the Māori community, by whānau, by hapu and by iwi, and providing a powerful part of this notion of the Māori cultural infrastructure. The whānau hapu iwi social structure itself, based on collectivism, far more powerful in connecting into those marae and to the Māori worldview than some other approaches which see us being identified as individuals, pulled out of our social context in which we have those other structures around us, and delivered services at an individual level which don't always suit us or do serve us very well at all. So we're identifying that collective social structure as a critical part of how Māori society is currently functioning. The links with the environment itself coming primarily at a level of understanding in our backgrounds and our culture in which we are the environment. We are Papatuanuku. We are part of the very environment we sit amongst. And so the issues related to how we manage the environment, how we interact with the environment, come out of a very powerful sense of connection, belonging, and a whakapapa connection. And finally, we're arguing that in a modern context, broadcasting in the IT world are critical parts of that cultural infrastructure itself. You had Tony Waho speaking earlier today and showing the story of his young boy. Now that boy, Pehi, was an AFS student to South America, and he was in South America when his father died. And one of the things that we know they did as a whānau to enable him to practice his whanaungatanga was that he attended his grandfather's tangi by Skype. And as they had critical parts of that tangi taking place, his parents stood there with the camera so that that boy could sit in South America and be part of his grandfather's tangi. Now, if we'd said to each other 10 years ago that that was a possibility for us in the future, how many of us would have felt comfortable about it happening? let alone really get a sense that it was a possibility. So where we come to in the report is an end point which looks at the knowledge economy and the knowledge society that we are all a part of, and that education and the work we do at the Families Commission is very much a part of preparing ourselves for, and the concluding thoughts that no culture has a mandate on genius, that the next great idea could and probably will come from any culture, including us as Māori, and that Māori cultural knowledge offers New Zealand an authentic point of difference. That New Zealand may not have been clear that Māori cultural knowledge was a source of creativity, innovation and transformative change might have been part of the legacy of the past. It cannot be a part of the legacy of the future, and this report is dedicated to helping change that view. Thank you for being here today. There's multiple copies. Kia ora koutou.